Hi, I'm Julia, and this is the story of how my family's perfect Christmas dinner became my moment of truth. Max, my brother, always made it clear I didn't fit in at the successful people's table, and my dad just went along with it. This year they told me not to come, that I'd only make things awkward. So I found myself spending Christmas Eve alone, nursing a hurt that ran deeper than I could admit. But what they didn't know was that while they were toasting to their future, I was about to sign a contract that would change everything. The very people they were so desperate to impress were about to call me partner. And that's when my real Christmas miracle began. Christmas Eve was supposed to be warm, glittering, full of laughter and the smell of cinnamon candles. Instead, my holiday started with a text message that felt like a slap across the face. Julia, this year's Christmas dinner is just for family. It's better if you don't come, you'll only make things awkward for your brother. Family only. I stared at the message until the words blurred. My brother Max had banned me from Christmas dinner, and my father had agreed. Don't embarrass your brother, Dad had said earlier that week, his voice heavy with the kind of authority that made questioning him useless. But what none of them knew was that the people they were so desperate to impress would soon call me partner. The text came while I was still in my small office above a bustling coffee shop downtown, the headquarters of a startup I'd built from scratch. The room smelled faintly of espresso and ink, the air humming with low music and ambition. On my desk sat two folders, one labeled Pending Clients, the other Acquisition Proposal Graves Capital. I'd spent years building this company from nothing, turning late nights into small victories, and then finally into success that didn't need to be explained. Still to my family. I was the receptionist who didn't know when to quit. I reread Dad's message. His words, "Don't embarrass your brother," rolled in my head like stones. He'd said the same thing when I was 14 after Max ruined my science fair project and I cried. He'd said it when Max forgot my college graduation. He'd said it last Thanksgiving when I wasn't invited because it's too formal for you. That sentence had become the family anthem, an instruction to shrink myself for the comfort of others. This year apparently was no different. I tried to tell myself I didn't care. After all, I had a company to run. I'd just finalized a major contract, one that could double my firm's valuation overnight. I had employees who respected me, investors who trusted me, clients who shook my hand and looked me in the eye. But that didn't stop the sting from crawling up my chest. Because no amount of success in the outside world ever canceled the ache of being excluded by your own blood. At 6 p.m, the city glowed in holiday lights, and snow began to fall outside my window, the kind that melts before it lands. I could picture their dinner vividly, my parents' big colonial house glowing from every window, laughter spilling into the snow, Max standing tall in his navy suit, his fiancée Lauren beside him, polished, perfect, ready to take her seat at the successful people's table. That's what he called it last year. Only successful people sit here, Max had said with that smug grin, patting the chair beside him, then turning to Lauren as if to joke. We'll save this seat for Julia when she gets a real job. Everyone laughed, including my father. My mother's eyes had softened for half a second, but she said nothing. She never did. The humiliation of that night had clung to me like smoke. I'd promised myself it would be the last time I let them define my worth. So instead of crying, I worked. I poured myself into my business until the numbers spoke louder than their laughter. And yet here I was, banned again. The phone buzzed. Another message from Mom this time. You understand, right? It's not personal. We just don't want tension during dinner. Not personal. Exclusion never is, apparently. It's just practical. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the framed photo on my wall, my company's first team photo. 10 people, all smiling, all standing in front of the small office we'd rented above a bakery. Most of them had been rejected elsewhere. I'd hired them because I knew what it felt like to be underestimated. Now they are thriving. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Maya, my operations manager, and the closest thing I had to family. Are you still here? She asked, stepping in with 2 cups of coffee. I forced a smile. Apparently I'm not welcome anywhere else. She frowned. What happened? I handed her my phone. She read the messages, her lips pressing into a thin line. "They don't deserve you," she said. "Maybe not," I murmured. "But it still hurts." Maya sat across from me, her tone gentle but firm. "Then make sure the next time they hear your name, it's in a headline, not in a whisper." I looked up. A headline. She smiled. "You said Graves Capital is finalizing the acquisition tomorrow, right? Imagine their faces when they realize the company your brother's firm's been chasing just made you a partner." Her words hung in the air like a spark waiting to ignite. I picked up the folder, labeled Graves Capital Proposal. Inside was the contract unsigned, waiting for tomorrow's final meeting. My signature would seal a deal worth millions, the kind that came with not just wealth, but respect. And power. Power to rewrite the story. I felt the corner of my mouth lift slow and deliberate. Maybe I said quietly, "Christmas will be interesting after all." Outside the city hummed with holiday cheer. Somewhere across town, my family was gathering around a table I wasn't invited to. Candles lit, laughter rising, champagne pouring. But soon, very soon, they'd find out whose name was on the contract sitting beneath their boss's Christmas tree. Because revenge doesn't always shout. Sometimes it signs in ink. And that night, as snow finally began to stick to the glass, I whispered to myself, "They banned me from their table. Fine, I'll build one they can't afford to sit at." The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. 6 missed calls, all from Mom. I almost didn't answer. Then came the text, "Please pick up. Your brother wants to talk." My stomach tightened. Every time she said your brother, it was like an order, not an introduction. Max didn't call to talk. He called to remind me where I stood. But something in me, maybe habit, maybe curiosity, made me swipe the screen. His voice came through smooth, confident, already wrapped in the arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. "Julia," he said, "I just wanted to make sure you understood." "Understood what?" "That you're not coming tonight." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor, only the cold satisfaction of his own unwitting admission. "I got the message." "Good," he replied easily. "It's nothing personal. This dinner's just important. Dad invited some people from the firm. Graves Capital, actually." I froze. "The Graves dinner?" I asked, steadying my voice. "Yeah," he said. "It's not the kind of thing where we can have distractions. That's what I was to him. Not a sister, not even a person, just background noise to mute." I kept my tone casual. "You said people from Graves are coming, right?" "Elliot Graves himself, plus a few partners. Big deal for me, you know, I've been trying to impress him for months." I wanted to laugh, but it came out as a quiet breath instead. He had no idea. He went on. "You should be happy for me, Julia. I mean, you've always been the artsy one, but this is real business. You know stock shares actual money." I bit my tongue. "I know more about shares than you think." "Sure you do," he said with that patronizing chuckle that made my blood boil. "Anyway, no hard feelings, right?" He didn't wait for my answer before hanging up. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in hand, staring at the window. Outside, the city was washed in winter light, cold and clean, the kind that revealed everything, even what you'd rather keep hidden. Elliot Graves. That name wasn't just familiar. It was the name on the contract sitting in my office drawer waiting for my signature. My brother's boss was about to become my business partner, and my family had no idea. I let that sink in. Every memory of being dismissed, of being talked over, of being made to feel like the family's failure began to shift in my mind, realigning like puzzle pieces, forming a different picture. I could already see it, their proud smiles as Elliot walked into their home tonight, my brother bragging about his future with the firm, Dad nodding with approval, and then Elliot calm and deliberate, turning to shake my hand when he saw me at tomorrow's meeting. The thought steadied me. For the first time, the ache of exclusion didn't sting. It burned with purpose. I dressed for work, each movement deliberate. Cream blouse, black slacks, hair tied neatly, no hint of the chaos that had cracked open inside me. When I arrived at the office, Maya was already there, laptop open, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. "Rough night?" she asked. I nodded. Max called. He's hosting the Graves dinner. Her eyes widened. You're kidding. I wish I were. She leaned forward. You realize what that means, right? Oh, I do, I said softly. It means he's about to host his own humiliation. Maya smiled that quiet, dangerous smile of someone who'd been underestimated too many times. Then let's make sure the ink's dry by morning, she said. We spent the next few hours finalizing every last detail of the deal, the valuation, the share distribution, the new brand name that would appear in the press release. My hands didn't shake once. At noon, I met with Elliot's assistant, a calm woman named Linda. Mr. Graves is looking forward to tomorrow's signing, she said. He mentioned how impressed he's been with your persistence. Persistence. That word used to be an insult when my father said it. He'd shake his head at my late nights and say, You're stubborn, Julia. You don't know when to quit. Now it was my strength. By the time the sun began to set, my inbox was full of congratulations from my team. I shut my laptop and leaned back, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Meanwhile, miles away, my family was preparing for Christmas dinner. I could imagine the scene perfectly, my mother arranging candles, fussing over the tablecloth, my father checking the wine, Max adjusting his tie, Lauren whispering compliments she didn't mean. I could almost hear Max's voice. Dad Elliot's one of the most powerful investors in the city. If this goes well, we could triple our firm's portfolio. And Dad's proud reply, That's my boy. He'd probably say it loud enough for everyone to hear. For years I'd tried to earn that kind of approval, the proud nod, the soft smile, the words, That's my girl. But those words had never been meant for me. Now I didn't need them, because tomorrow morning, while they were still basking in their self-satisfaction, I'd be sitting across from Elliot Graves, the same man they were desperate to impress, signing a partnership deal that would make me his equal. I smiled to myself, not out of malice, but out of justice, finally finding its shape. Christmas Eve wasn't over yet, and though they'd locked me out of their house, I was about to open a door none of them even knew existed. I whispered to the empty office, my voice low, steady. Certain, they said only successful people sit at their table. Fine, I'll own the company that builds the table. Outside, the first snow of the night began to fall, soft but relentless, like truth, like karma, like the quiet beginning of a reckoning that had been waiting far too long. They say Christmas dinner brings families closer, but that night it only proved how far apart we really were. While snow dusted the city in silence, I sat in my apartment, a single candle flickering on the table beside a cold cup of cocoa. Across town, my family's house blazed with light, a stage set for appearances, not affection. I could almost hear the laughter through memory alone, my brother Max at the head of the table, and my father beaming beside him, and my mother moving between guests like a hostess on autopilot. They didn't know that the empire they bragged about tonight would belong to the woman they'd left off the guest list. From my window, I watched the streetlights blur against the snow. The city seemed quieter than usual, as if holding its breath. I picked up my phone, the screen glowing against the dark, and opened social media. It took only seconds to find them. My mother had posted a photo captioned, Family and Success, What Christmas is All About. There they were, Dad in his dark suit, Max smiling, like a man rehearsing confidence, Lauren leaning close, showing off her engagement ring. My name wasn't tagged. It never was. Underneath, someone commented, Where's Julia? Mom replied, She's busy with work, always so dedicated. Dedicated. That was her word for invisible. The word hit me like a blow, sharp and quiet, a reminder of the role she'd assigned me for years. I put the phone down. The silence pressed heavy. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being forgotten by people who should remember you first. I turned on the record player in the corner, an old Billie Holiday album. Her voice filled the room, soft, aching, eternal. Music was the only company that didn't ask questions. Then a knock at the door. 3 short taps. I froze. When I opened it, Maya stood there, her cheeks pink from the cold, holding 2 takeout boxes. I figured you wouldn't be at that dinner, she said simply. I smiled, despite the lump in my throat. You figured right. She stepped in, setting the food on my small kitchen counter. Well, I'm not letting you spend Christmas alone. And before you argue, no, this isn't charity. It's survival. Mine and yours. I laughed, the sound shaky but real. You're ridiculous. Yep, she said, opening the boxes. And I brought dumplings, not turkey. Because honestly, revenge digests better with soy sauce. I raised an eyebrow. Revenge? Maya leaned on the counter. You think I didn't hear about Max's big dinner? About how Graves Capital's coming tonight? You know what's poetic? By this time tomorrow, you'll be the one holding the pen that decides his future. Her words were sharp but comforting in their truth. It's not revenge, I said quietly. It's correction. Call it what you want, she replied, smiling. Just make sure they spell your name right when the press release drops. We ate together, the warmth of food and friendship filling the small apartment. For the first time all day I felt steady. The kind of steady that comes right before a storm breaks. As the night deepened, I imagined the conversation happening miles away. Max swirling his wine, telling stories about his firm and his team. My father laughing too loud, pride stitched into every word. So Mr. Graves, he'd say, you've got a sharp young man on your hands. Max is your future. Elliot Graves, calm, deliberate, the kind of man who measured his silence, would nod politely. He was used to men like my father, used to arrogance dressed as charm. And then maybe, just maybe, Elliot would mention my name. Funny, he might say, I'm meeting with a Julia Carter tomorrow morning. Extraordinary work ethic. Visionary in her field. The table would fall silent. My mother's smile would freeze. Max's hand would pause midair, the confidence draining from his face. I didn't need to be there to see it. I could feel it already the moment the truth entered the room like an uninvited guest. The thought made me smile, slow and small, not cruel, but certain. Because that's what justice looks like sometimes, quiet, patient, inevitable. Around 9. Maya stretched, glancing at her phone. They're probably finishing dessert about now, she said. Good, I replied. Let them choke on it. She grinned. Merry Christmas, Julia. Merry Christmas, Maya. After she left, I sat by the window again, watching snow fall over the city. My reflection stared back, tired eyes but clear. For years I'd chased approval from people who mistook love for hierarchy. But tonight, something shifted. I didn't envy their table anymore. I pitied it. A table built on appearances is always one argument away from collapse. Mine, the one I was building, would be different. Stronger. Made of people who saw worth before proof. The clock struck midnight. Christmas Day. I reached for my laptop, opened the document labeled Partnership Agreement, and scrolled to the bottom. My cursor hovered over the signature line. I typed my full name, Julia Carter. There it was, my future sealed by my own hand. Outside, church bells began to ring faintly through the snow. Somewhere across town, my family was likely toasting to success, unaware that the very company funding their pride now had my name on its top line. I closed the laptop, turned off the light, and whispered into the dark, Merry Christmas, Dad. Merry Christmas, Max. You wanted a table for the successful congratulations. I built it. And I own the chairs. The snow kept falling, soft, relentless cleansing. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The morning after Christmas felt sharper than winter itself. The world outside my apartment was covered in white, but inside everything burned with anticipation. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept replaying the same picture, my brother laughing across the dinner table, my father raising a glass, all of them blissfully unaware that the woman they'd excluded was about to walk into their boss's office as his new partner. Revenge had never been part of my holiday plans, but sometimes justice has impeccable timing. By noon, they'd still be digesting last night's feast, while I'd be signing my name onto something permanent power. I arrived at Graves Capital just before 9. The lobby gleamed like something out of a magazine, all marble and glass, the kind of place meant to remind you who was in control. The receptionist smiled, polished and professional. Good morning, Ms. Carter. Mr. Graves will see you shortly. Ms. Carter. Not Miss, not sweetheart, not the girl from reception. Just Carter. It hit deeper than I expected. As I waited, I caught my reflection in the glass wall beside me, tailored suit, steady posture, calm eyes. I'd come a long way from the girl serving coffee in other people's offices. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Mom. Hope you're enjoying the holiday. Your brother's dinner was wonderful last night. No mention of me. No question about how I was. Just another performance review for her favorite child. I put the phone face down on the seat beside me. It could wait. Ms. Carter, the receptionist said. Smiling again, Mr. Graves will see you now. Elliot Graves's office was understated compared to the lobby, dark wood, quiet confidence, and a window overlooking the frozen skyline. He rose from his chair as I entered. Tall, mid-50s, the kind of presence that filled the room without needing to raise his voice. Julia, he said, offering his hand. Good to finally meet you in person. Likewise, I replied. I appreciate you making time today. He gestured toward the table where two folders sat side by side, one marked Carter Consulting, the other, Graves Capital Holdings. I've been following your work, he said. When my team brought your proposal, I told them it was one of the few that didn't just talk about growth, it showed it. I smiled. Persistence pays off, I guess. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. It does. I built my company the same way, brick by brick. Though sometimes persistence comes at a cost. I knew what he meant. I'd paid that cost in loneliness, sleepless nights, missed birthdays, and all the dinners where I was too busy to attend. But that cost had bought me something my family never had: independence. Elliot opened the folder. Let's get to it. The next hour passed in a blur of signatures, terms, and percentages. I watched my name appear on every page, aligning with his. Partner. It wasn't a title to me, it was a reclamation. When the final signature dried, Elliot leaned back and said, Congratulations, Julia. You're officially part of the Graves team. I exhaled slowly. Thank you. It's an honor. Not an honor, he corrected gently. A partnership. He poured 2 glasses of champagne from the small bar behind his desk and handed me one. To new beginnings, he said. We clinked glasses. The taste was crisp, bright, like the start of something clean. Then he smiled slightly. You know, I met your brother last night. I nearly choked. You what? He chuckled at my reaction. Yes, he hosted dinner for the firm's Christmas gathering. Fine meal, though he was quite preoccupied with impressing everyone. I composed myself. That sounds like Max. Elliot's gaze sharpened. He mentioned having a sister, said you were still figuring things out. That you'd left the corporate path to experiment. I felt the corner of my mouth lift. He always did have a creative way of defining success. Elliot studied me again, then said, It'll be interesting when he realizes who signed the other side of this deal. For the first time that morning, I laughed. Oh, I'm counting on that, he grinned. Something tells me you'll handle it gracefully. Graceful revenge, the only kind worth having. When I left his office, the wind outside bit against my skin, but I barely felt it. My phone buzzed again, another message from Mom. I ignored it. Instead, I opened my email app and drafted a short message to Maya. It's done. Partner, officially. Her reply came within minutes. They're going to lose their minds. I smiled, slipping the phone into my pocket. That's the idea. The elevator doors opened, and for a brief moment, I caught my reflection again. Not the daughter who wasn't invited, not the sister who'd been mocked, just me. The woman who'd built something from nothing and signed her name beside the man her family worshipped. Outside, the world was still wrapped in white sunlight bouncing off every surface. I breathed it in the air, the moment, the quiet satisfaction that comes when justice finally catches up with arrogance. They had spent years measuring my worth against my brother's. Now the scale has shifted permanently. By the time my family sat down to lunch, word would spread through the firm. The emails would circulate. The whispers would start. Elliot Graves just made Julia Carter a partner. And somewhere between their dessert and their disbelief, my father would drop his fork, realizing too late that the daughter he dismissed was the one who'd just changed the weight of their name. I pulled my coat tighter against the wind, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Merry Christmas indeed. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline that evening, the news had already spread. It began as a whisper in a boardroom, then rippled through the corridors of Graves' Capital like a slow, elegant detonation. Julia Carter, the new partner. By nightfall, it wasn't a rumor anymore. It was fact. Screens lit up, inboxes buzzed, and my name, the name they'd mocked, flashed across the firm's internal memo. Across town at my family's dinner table, I imagined the clinking of silverware halting midair, the air thickening with disbelief. It wasn't just revenge anymore, it was revelation. The first call came from Maya. She didn't say hello, didn't even try to sound calm. "It's everywhere, Julia," she said, breathless. "They published the press release early. You're trending on every finance page in the city." I paused mid-step, standing in the middle of my apartment phone pressed to my ear. Already, she repeated, then laughed. I guess Graves' Capital doesn't waste time celebrating their wins. My reflection in the window looked almost foreign. Same eyes, same face, but steadier now. "Let them talk," I said softly. I've waited a long time for silence to end. At that exact moment, another call came through Mom. I hesitated before answering. The phone rang again and again, relentless. When I finally picked up, her voice cracked before she could even form words. "Julia, what did you do?" I closed my eyes. "I worked, Mom. That's all I ever did." You're with Elliot Graves now. I'm his partner." There was a pause. I could almost hear the sound of her hand tightening around the phone, her breath hitching. "Your brother, he's devastated. He says this will ruin his reputation." "Ruin his reputation?" I said, incredulous. "Funny. He didn't seem worried about mine when he barred me from Christmas dinner." Her voice grew smaller. "He didn't mean it like that. He meant it exactly like that, I said. And so did you." Silence stretched between us. Cold, heavy, honest. For once, she didn't have a script. "Julia," she said, finally, her tone trembling, "can't you just fix this?" "Fix it," I repeated, a bitter laugh slipping out. "You think success needs fixing? I'm asking you to be kind," she whispered. "He's your brother." "And I was your daughter," I said quietly. "But that didn't stop you from locking the door." I hung up before she could respond. The phone buzzed again almost immediately. This time it was Dad. His message came through as a single line. "You made your point. Enough now. Enough." That word again. The family's favorite commandment. Don't embarrass, don't speak, don't exceed. Enough. I deleted the message. For the next few hours, I stayed in the quiet. My apartment glowed with the reflection of city lights, the hum of something new and electric settling in the air. Revenge wasn't supposed to feel peaceful, but it did. Not gloating, not cruel, just justified. At midnight, I received a message from an unknown number. "Congratulations, partner." It was Elliot. He added another line. "Your brother's reaction was educational." I smiled. I could imagine it vividly, Max walking into the office full of his usual swagger, greeted by whispers and sidelong glances. Someone probably handed him a printed copy of the memo. He would scan the words once, twice before the blood drained from his face. And when he reached the line that said, "Effective immediately, Julia Carter joins Graves' Capital as partner," he'd know his empire had shifted. By morning, the internet had finished what the memo started. I folded the paper neatly, set it on the counter, and whispered under my breath, "Merry Christmas, Max." Somewhere in their polished suburban kitchen, my family was probably having breakfast in silence. No laughter, no boasting. The same silence they'd once forced on me now wrapped around them instead. And as I locked the door behind me, heading to my first official day as a partner, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Not from them, but from the need to prove anything to them ever again. They had wanted me gone from their dinner table. Now they could sit at theirs in peace while I took my seat at one built from truth, not approval. Justice, it turned out, was best served cold, just like Christmas morning. I didn't expect another dinner invitation from my family, especially not after Christmas. But power has a strange way of rewriting people's manners. 3 days after my partnership announcement, my phone buzzed with a message from Mom that read, "Family dinner this Friday. We'd love to talk." Please come." The words were polite, but I could smell the desperation between the lines. When they excluded me before it was pride. Now it was panic disguised as reconciliation. Still, I couldn't resist. After all, sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold, it's served face to face. I stared at the message for a long moment, my reflection caught in the black glass of the screen. The same mother who told me not to embarrass my brother now wanted me at the table she'd once barred me from. I typed my reply carefully. "Of course, Mom. I'll be there." Maya didn't even try to hide her smirk when I told her. "You're actually going—" "Please tell me you're bringing a crown." I laughed softly. "No crown. Just composure." "Composure," she repeated, grinning. "The deadliest weapon of all." Friday came faster than I expected. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for the first time in almost a year. Their home in Maplewood looked exactly as I remembered it, immaculate, expensive, and cold. The wreath on the door was still the same one Mom used every year, slightly crooked, though she never noticed. When she opened the door, her smile looked painted on. "Julia," she breathed, her smile trembling. "We're so glad you could make it." Dad appeared behind her, his posture stiff, a glass already in hand. "Glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. The dining room table glowed under the chandelier, 12 chairs perfectly set. This time my seat wasn't missing. I took it deliberately at the far end across from Max. He looked different, less confident, more contained, like a man nursing a bruise beneath his suit. "Julia," he said coolly. "Congratulations. Big promotion." "Thank you," I said. "Partnership, actually." He nodded, jaw tight. "You must be thrilled." "I am," I said. "Elliot's been nothing but supportive." Mom stepped in quickly. "We're all so proud of you," she said, voice a touch too bright. "It's such an accomplishment. Your father's been telling everyone how smart you are." Dad grunted. "You worked hard. We've always said that." I smiled. "No, Dad. You said Max worked hard. You said I was stubborn." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face, but he covered it with a sip of wine. "That's not how I remember it. Memory's funny like that," I said quietly. Dinner began, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Mom asked about my projects, feigning interest. Grace, my younger sister, ever the peacemaker, offered polite smiles. Max mostly watched his fork, moving food around his plate more than eating it. So Mom said carefully, "I heard Mr. Graves spoke highly of you. You must be learning a lot from him." I set my wine glass down. "I'm not learning from him, Mom. I'm working with him. We share the same title now." The room fell silent. Even the clinking of utensils stopped. Dad cleared his throat. "Partner, huh? That's impressive. Though I imagine that brings responsibilities." "It does," I said. "Like overseeing major accounts, including the ones Max handles." Max's eyes snapped up. "Excuse me." I tilted my head slightly. "Didn't you read the memo? Graves Capital merged with Carter Consulting? Which means effectively I'm part of the approval process for your firm's financial portfolio." He froze. His fiancée Lauren shifted uncomfortably beside him, eyes darting toward Mom. "So that means," she began softly. "That means I finished for her. Max reports to me now." "Indirectly." The silence that followed was almost symphonic. Dad's face reddened, his grip tightening around his glass. "That's absurd." "It's structure," I said calmly. "It's business." Mom tried to smile again, but her voice shook. "You can't expect your brother to—" "I don't expect anything," I interrupted gently. "That's the beauty of it." Max pushed back from the table slightly. "You're doing this on purpose. To humiliate me." I met his gaze evenly. "No, Max. I'm doing this because I earned it. The humiliation part, that's your interpretation." For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Then Grace broke the silence. "You both sound insane," she whispered. "It's Christmas week." I turned to her, my tone softening. "You're right. Maybe it's time we stop pretending we're a happy family and start being an honest one." Mom's hands trembled. "Julia, please. Can we just have one dinner without what, Mom?" I asked. Truth, the room went still again. Max looked away first. Dad drained his glass. And for the first time, I didn't feel small at that table. I didn't feel unwanted. I felt seen. Dinner ended in uneasy silence. No hugs, no laughter, no toasts. Just the quiet recognition that the family order had shifted and I had been the one to turn it upside down. When I reached the door to leave, Dad spoke softly. "Julia." I turned. He hesitated, then said, "Don't forget where you came from." I smiled faintly. "Don't worry, Dad. You remind me every time." The night air outside was cold and biting, but I didn't shiver. I'd walked into their world and walked out untouched, stronger, calmer, and utterly unafraid. Inside, I imagined Max's glass finally slipping from his hand, shattering against the polished floor. Some truths are loud even in silence. The night had already begun to splinter under its own tension when the doorbell rang. It was sharp, sudden, and out of place, cutting through the brittle quiet that hung over the dinner table like frost. My mother froze mid-sentence, her hand hovering over a wineglass. My father frowned. Max glanced at the clock, confused. "Who would show up unannounced?" he muttered. No one moved at first. Then, with a sigh heavy enough to shake the air, Dad stood up to answer it. None of us could have known that the man on the other side of that door would change the story forever. The sound of the door opening carried through the house, followed by a pause long enough to make everyone's heart stutter. And then we heard it, a deep, familiar voice. Calm. Certain. "Evening," Richard Elliott Graves said. Every muscle in my body went still. From the dining room, I could see the shadow of his tall frame stretch across the hallway tiles before he appeared perfectly composed in a charcoal coat, a faint snowflake melting on his shoulder. My father stammered, utterly thrown, "Mr. Graves, what on earth? This is unexpected." Elliot smiled slightly, a glint of amusement in his eye. "I was having a late business dinner nearby and realized I had an important document for Julia. Thought I'd save us all a trip tomorrow and drop it off." He gestured with a subtle nod towards me. "No need to rush to the office in the morning, Julia. I believe you have a family to catch up with." The silence that followed was electric. My mother blinked rapidly, her voice too high when she said, "You know?" Julia Elliott turned his head, his gaze finding mine across the table. "Know her? She's my partner." The air in the room shifted instantly. My father's hand tightened around the doorframe. My mother's painted smile faltered, and Max's expression drained of color faster than any words could explain. The same man my brother had bragged about working under, the one he'd called his boss, his mentor, his ticket to status, was now standing in my parents' doorway calling me partner. "Partner," Dad repeated faintly. "You must mean—" Associate Elliott's eyes flickered with amusement. "No, partner. We signed the papers 3 days ago. She's running joint strategy with me across our major accounts. You should be proud." Proud. The word hung in the air like smoke. Mom recovered first, or at least tried to. She hurried forward with forced hospitality, her voice trembling. "Mr. Graves, please come in. Would you like something to drink? Coffee, perhaps?" Elliot nodded politely, stepping into the glow of the chandelier. "Just a few minutes. I won't stay long." He turned to me. "Julia, you didn't mention this was family night." I rose slowly from my chair, steady but deliberate. It wasn't supposed to be. I was invited last minute. He gave a small smile, subtle knowing. "Well, I'm glad you accepted." My brother looked like he'd swallowed glass. "Julia," he said tightly, "you didn't tell us you were working that closely with Mr. Graves." "I didn't think it mattered," I replied evenly. "After all, only successful people sit at this table." Right? Max's jaw clenched, but before he could respond, Elliot stepped in, casually glancing between us. "Ah, yes, that table. I've heard about this dinner. Quite the tradition." My father tried to laugh, but it came out strangled. "Oh, just family banter. You know how it is." Elliot's eyes settled on him, cool, unhurried, piercing. "I do. Families are fascinating, especially the way they define success." The weight of his words wasn't lost on anyone. Mom fiddled with the edge of her napkin, Max stared into his untouched glass, and my father shifted uncomfortably. Elliot continued, voice soft, but edged with steel. "Richard, your son's done well, ambitious, confident, but Julia—" He turned to me again. "Julia's exceptional. I've rarely met someone who can build something from nothing and make it last. That kind of resilience, well, that's what leadership looks like." For a heartbeat, the only sound was the faint hum of the chandelier above us. Then quietly my father said, "You don't say." Elliot smiled faintly. "I do." Then, as if remembering something, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek black envelope. "Julia, this was delivered to the office today. Thought I'd bring it personally." I took it from him, heart steady. "Thank you. Of course." His eyes lingered on mine for a moment, an unspoken understanding passing between us before he turned to my family again. "Well, I'll let you get back to your dinner. Though I must say you've raised a remarkable woman." He extended his hand toward my father. My dad reached out automatically, but his fingers trembled as he shook it. "Pleasure meeting you all," Elliot said smoothly. "Enjoy the evening." And then, with the same quiet confidence he'd entered with, he turned and left. The door clicked shut behind him. For a few seconds, no one breathed. Then somewhere down the table, glass hit wood. My father's wine glass had slipped from his hand and shattered against the floor, red liquid spreading like spilled shame across the white tablecloth. No one moved to clean it up. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came. Max's hands were fists against the table. Finally, I looked at them, each one of them, and said calm and clear, "Now do you understand why I didn't need an invitation?" The clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. For once they had no words left to weaponize, no excuses left to shield themselves. The daughter they'd dismissed, the sister they'd mocked, had just been publicly acknowledged by the man they all revered. The hierarchy they'd built their pride on had collapsed quietly under a chandelier's glow. And as I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass door, steady, composed, and free. I didn't need to say another word. The sound of my father's shattered glass said everything for me. The silence after Elliot's departure was deafening, thick, pulsing, alive. My father's shattered glass still glittered on the floor, red wine pooling like blood beneath the chandelier. No one moved to clean it. No one spoke. We just sat there, trapped in the aftermath of a moment that had stripped away every pretense this family had ever built. My mother's smile was frozen, her hands trembling over her napkin. Max stared down at the table as, if it had betrayed him, his face drained of color. For the first time in my life, I was the calmest person in the room. "Julia." My father finally said, his voice low and shaking with restrained anger. "What was that?" "What was what?" I replied, tone even. "That performance," he snapped. "You invited your boss here to humiliate us." I leaned back in my chair, unfazed. "Dad?" "I didn't invite anyone. Elliot came on his own." "Mr. Graves," my mother corrected automatically, as though clinging to politeness could save face. I turned to her. "You mean the man who just called me his partner?" She flinched. Max pushed back his chair, the legs scraping sharply against the hardwood. "You think this is funny? You think embarrassing me in front of him makes you powerful?" I met his glare. "No, Max. I think it makes me seen." He barked a bitter laugh. "You really think he sees you as an equal? He's using you, Julia. You're a headline, a diversity story, a quota ticked off his corporate checklist." The words cut, but I didn't let him see it. I smiled instead, slow and steady. "Funny. That headline happens to be signing off on your firm's accounts next quarter." His face flushed crimson. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" The quiet that followed was almost cruel. My mother interjected, voice soft but trembling. "Max, sit down. Please, let's not do this here." He ignored her. "You've always been jealous," he spat. "Always needed to prove something. You couldn't just be happy for me." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Jealous. Of what exactly?" "The dinner table you turned into a throne. The approval of a father who can't tell love from pride." Dad's hand slammed against the table, making the silverware jump. "That's enough," he roared. "You don't talk to your brother like that." I looked at him unflinching. You mean the same way you didn't talk to me when he banned me from Christmas dinner? His jaw tightened. That was a misunderstanding. No, I said, my voice low but steady. It was a declaration. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't stop. The truth had waited long enough. For years I continued, you made it clear who mattered here. Max the golden boy, Grace the peacemaker, and me the disappointment you could never quite erase. You made me fight for space in a family that should have been mine by right. Dad exhaled through his nose, trying to reclaim control. You're being dramatic. Am I asked quietly. You taught me that worth comes from approval, from titles, from fitting the mold you built. And the moment I stopped needing those things, you decided I was the problem. The table fell silent again. My mother dabbed her eyes with her napkin. Max sat rigid, staring at the floor. I stood slowly, my voice softening. You wanted a family of appearances, but appearances don't last. Reality does. Dad muttered, You're twisting things. Maybe, I said, but at least I'm not pretending anymore. I took my coat from the back of the chair. My mother's voice broke through the silence. Julia, please don't go. We didn't know. We didn't understand what you were doing. I turned to her, my expression calm but unyielding. You didn't want to understand, because it was easier to believe I failed than admit you underestimated me. Her lips quivered. You're our daughter, and I still am, I said softly. But now I'm also someone else, someone you can't control. The grandfather clock ticked in the corner, marking every second of their unraveling. I moved toward the door. My father didn't look at me. My mother whispered my name once more, but I didn't turn back. Max muttered something under his breath, something about luck, about arrogance, but his voice cracked halfway through, betraying the anger for what it really was, fear. When I reached the doorway, I paused. Dad, I said without looking back, tell Max to check his inbox tomorrow morning. There's a new account approval form from Graves Capital waiting for his signature. It lists me as his direct oversight contact. My father's glassy reflection caught mine in the hallway mirror. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Julia, he said hoarsely, don't destroy your family over pride. I turned then, meeting his gaze. You destroyed this family the moment you decided pride mattered more than love. The wind outside howled as I opened the door, cold air rushing in. Behind me, the chandelier flickered, the sound of my heels echoing through the hall. The door clicked shut behind me, soft, final, and satisfying. As I stepped into the night, snowflakes brushed my hair, melting on my cheeks like fragments of everything I'd finally let go. I didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity. Inside that house, the hierarchy had cracked. Outside, under the clean, cold sky, I felt the weight lift. They could have their table, their performance, their pride. I had something better, my freedom, my voice, and the knowledge that I didn't need their permission to exist anymore. Somewhere behind me, through the frosted window, I saw my father lower his head into his hands. My mother's lips moved in silent prayer. And Max. He sat there perfectly still, the wine stain spreading like a shadow across his sleeve. The storm had arrived. But this time, I was the one who brought it. The morning after the dinner felt different. The city was quiet, almost reverent, as if even the wind knew something had shifted. My phone hadn't stopped vibrating since dawn, reporters, colleagues, even old classmates I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone wanted a quote, a comment, a piece of the story. But I didn't respond to any of them. The only message I waited for wasn't from the media. It was from my family. And when it finally came, it wasn't what I expected. My mother's text appeared at 7:30 a.m. Simple and small, he's gone. I froze reading it twice. Gone. Not dead, but gone. My father had packed a bag and left the house sometime in the middle of the night. No note, no explanation, no warning. The next message came seconds later. Your father can't handle what happened. Please come. For a long minute, I just stood there in my apartment, the city light breaking through the blinds in thin silver lines. The same man who had told me not to embarrass my brother was now the one hiding from the mess he'd helped create. When I finally replied, my hands were steady. "I'll be there in an hour." The drive to Maplewood was quiet, the highway nearly empty. Snow lined the edges of the road, gray and brittle. I'd made that drive countless times before, usually with my heart heavy, anticipating another cold dinner or a thin smile. This time it felt different. I wasn't going to seek approval. I was going because I needed closure. When I arrived, Mom looked 10 years older. Her makeup was smeared, her hair undone, her usual elegance replaced by something raw and human. "Julia," she breathed as though saying my name hurt. "Your father left around midnight. He said he needed space. Space from what I asked. From us. From all of this." She waved vaguely toward the living room as if the walls themselves were guilty. "He said he couldn't stand what happened last night, that he didn't recognize our family anymore." I almost laughed. Maybe for the first time he actually saw it. Her shoulders sagged. "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted my children fighting like enemies?" I looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't stop it either." Her eyes welled up. "I tried." I shook my head. "No, Mom. You managed. You covered. You performed, but you never tried to change it." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take them back. She sat down slowly, wringing her hands. "Your brother hasn't come home. He stayed at Lauren's. He's not answering my calls." I sighed. "He's humiliated. He'll recover." Her eyes lifted to mine, hopeful, almost pleading. "And what about you, Julia? Will you forgive us?" The question hit harder than I expected. Forgive. The idea felt too clean, too simple. "I don't know," I said quietly. "Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. And I can't forget the years you made me small just so he could feel big." She flinched. "That's not what we meant to do." "But that's what you did." Silence stretched between us. The old clock in the hallway ticked like a metronome of regret. Then she whispered, "He told me once. He was afraid of you." I blinked. "Afraid?" She nodded, her voice trembling. "Not afraid you'd fail. Afraid you'd succeed. Afraid that one day he'd look at you and see everything he never had the courage to become." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, quiet at first, then rippling outward until they reached every corner of my memory. I thought of every time he'd belittled my choices, dismissed my career, deflected my pride. Maybe it was never about disappointment. Maybe it was fear. Mom reached across the table, her hand shaking. "Julia, please. Whatever you think of us, don't let this family fall apart completely. We're still your parents." I stared at her hand for a long moment, before gently pulling mine away. "You're still my parents," I said softly. "But I'm not your child anymore. Not the way you knew me." She broke down, then her sobs quiet but uncontrollable. I didn't move to comfort her. Not out of cruelty, but out of exhaustion. For years I'd carried their guilt on my shoulders. I wasn't going to carry it anymore. When I stood to leave, she whispered, "If he comes back, what should I tell him?" I paused by the door. Tell him the truth. That I didn't destroy this family. I just stopped pretending it was perfect. Outside, the wind cut through the air, sharp and clean. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the house, the manicured lawn, the glowing windows, the illusion of control. Then I started the engine. Halfway back to the city, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't from Mom. It was from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously. It was from Dad. His message was short. "I need to talk. Meet me tomorrow. Same place you used to go when you needed to think." For a moment I couldn't breathe. He remembered. The old bridge near Willow Creek where I used to go as a teenager to escape the noise. I stared at the message, the edges of anger and pity, blurring into something softer, something dangerously close to hope. I typed one word back, "Okay." As the snow began to fall again, I drove into the night, the lights of the city rising ahead like the promise of something unfinished. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. but for the first time it wasn't revenge that kept me moving. It was something harder, something heavier, the faint flickering possibility of peace. The bridge hadn't changed. The same rusted railing, the same quiet stream cutting through the frozen woods below, the same echo of wind moving through the trees. I used to come here as a teenager when I couldn't stand the sound of my family's arguments, when I needed somewhere to breathe. And now, years later, I stood there again, older, colder, stronger, waiting for the man whose approval had once meant everything. I didn't know what he wanted to say. I only knew this: whatever came next, it wouldn't break me. That version of me was gone for good. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel before I saw his car. A moment later, my father stepped out, bundled in his long wool coat, his face drawn and pale. He looked smaller than I remembered. "Julia," he said, voice low, uncertain. "Dad." We stood in silence for a few seconds, the cold biting at the air between us. He glanced around as if searching for the right place to start. "You still come here." "Not for years," I said. "But you remembered." He gave a weary smile. "Some things stick." We stood side by side, leaning on the railing, watching the thin layer of ice glint on the water. Finally he sighed. "I owe you an apology." I didn't respond right away. I just let the sound of the stream fill the space where words usually failed us. For what I asked at last. For— he hesitated. "For not being proud of you when I should have been. For letting my fear make me cruel." I turned to look at him, but he didn't meet my eyes. His voice was steadier now, almost practiced. "You have to understand, Julia. I built my life on rules. Predictability. The company, the family, everything. It was all about order. You never followed those rules. You made your own. And I didn't know how to handle that." I let out a quiet laugh, bitter but small. "You punished me for it." He nodded. "I did. Because watching you succeed where I never could, it made me feel irrelevant." The honesty in his voice startled me. I'd waited years for excuses, not truth. And yet here he was, unraveling his pride one thread at a time. He looked up at the gray sky. "When I saw you standing at that dinner table after Elliot left, you looked just like I did the first time I realized no one was coming to save me. I spent my life trying to protect my pride, thinking it was the same as protecting my family. But last night, when my own world shattered, I saw you. You had to learn to save yourself, and you did. That's a kind of strength I never had. That caught me off guard." "What do you mean?" He exhaled slowly. Fog blooming in the cold air. "Your grandfather treated me the way I treated you. He made me believe my worth depended on what I could control. I spent my whole life chasing approval that never came. And when I finally had a family of my own, I repeated the same thing, thinking control meant love." I stared at the stream, my chest tight. For years I'd hated him. Now, for the first time, I understood him. "Dad," I said softly, "you can't fix the past with explanations." He nodded. "I know. I can only stop making it worse." He turned toward me, then really looking at me for the first time. His eyes were tired but clear. "You were right about one thing. We built a family on appearances, on success, reputation, pride. But you built something real, something that doesn't need our approval to exist." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You hurt me, Dad. A lot. I know," he said, his voice breaking. "And I'll live with that. But I need you to know I'm proud of you, Julia. I've always been proud. I was just too stubborn to say it. It was the kind of sentence I dreamt of hearing once. But now, standing there, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I wasn't the daughter waiting for validation. I was the woman who'd learned to give it to herself." "Thank you," I said simply. He smiled faintly. "You sound just like your mother when she's holding back tears." I let out a small laugh. "She told me you were gone." "I needed space," he said. "To think. To understand what I'd done. To realize that power means nothing if it costs you your family." He looked out over the frozen water again. "I don't expect forgiveness. But maybe one day we can start over." The air between us softened. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched a single snowflake drift down land on the railing and melt into nothing. Maybe I said finally, "But it won't look the same as before. I'm not coming back to that version of us." He nodded slowly. "I wouldn't want you to." We stood there a little longer, two people bound by blood, but separated by years of silence, finally meeting in the middle. When he finally turned to leave, he hesitated. "Julia." "Yeah." He smiled, a real one this time. "You remind me of your mother when she was young, except braver." And then he was gone. I stayed on the bridge for a while, the wind brushing through my hair, the ice cracking faintly below. For years I'd thought revenge would feel like victory, but standing there what I felt was something deeper, not forgiveness, not forgetfulness, but release. The kind that comes when you stop fighting the ghosts of who you used to be. As I walked back to my car, I didn't look back. The bridge would always be there, but I didn't need it anymore. When I walked into the office Monday morning, everything felt sharper. The air, the silence, even the looks from my team. People had read the headlines. They knew about the Christmas dinner, about Elliot showing up at my parents' house, about the glass that shattered when truth finally made its entrance. Power moves don't stay private long in this city. But for the first time in my career, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. Let them talk. Let them guess. I hadn't built my life to be understood by people who measured success by gossip. Elliot was already in the boardroom when I arrived. He stood by the window reading something on his tablet, the skyline spread behind him like a portrait of authority. He didn't turn as I entered, just said, "You made quite the impression, Carter." I smiled faintly. "So I've heard." He finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I received 3 phone calls this weekend, one from your brother, one from your father, and one from a rather distressed family friend named Lauren." I raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. All 3 wanted me fired," he chuckled. "Oh, they didn't dare use that word. They just wanted to discuss professionalism." I exhaled slowly. Of course they did. Elliot set the tablet down and leaned back against the table. "You know, Julia, there's something I've learned in this business. People hate the ones who remind them of their limits. You showed them a mirror they weren't ready to face." I met his gaze steadily. They built their world on control. I just stopped living inside it. He nodded, his tone softer now. "Still, I'm curious. Where does that leave you? Revenge burns bright, but it doesn't last. What comes next?" The question hung in the air. For the first time in months, I didn't have an immediate answer. "Maybe peace," I said finally. "Or something that feels like it." He smiled. "You've earned it." A knock at the door interrupted us. Maya poked her head in, her grin mischievous. "Sorry to intrude, but you'll want to see this." She handed me a newspaper. The headline read, "Carter's Rise redefines the game. Graves Capital's youngest partner sets new record." I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. "You've got to be kidding." Maya winked. "They love you. Half the industry wants to know your next move." Elliot chuckled. "So do I." I folded the paper, neatly setting it on the table. "I think I'll build something of my own again. Not for recognition, just because I can." He studied me for a moment. "When you're ready, I'll invest." I smiled. "Careful, Elliot. You might regret that offer." He grinned. "I doubt it." The meeting ended soon after, but his question lingered with me. What comes next? That evening, as I left the office, the winter light was fading over the city. The streets shimmered with the reflection of headlights, and the air smelled like frost and distant pine. I stopped at a coffee shop near the river, the kind of place I used to visit before the world demanded so much of me. Sitting by the window, I pulled out my phone. There were dozens of unread messages, reporters, investors, acquaintances, suddenly remembering I existed. And then buried between them, one from Grace. I hesitated before opening it. "I know everything's changed, but I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. I should have said it years ago." I read it twice, then once more before replying. "Thank you. That means more than you think." No anger, no tension, just truth. When I got home that night, my apartment felt warmer somehow. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window looking down at the glittering veins of the city. For years, I'd chased their approval, my father's, my mother's, Max's. I'd believed success only mattered if they acknowledged it. But now I knew better. The power was never in their validation. It was in my persistence, the refusal to break when they told me to bend. As I sipped my wine, a thought crossed my mind, quiet, but certain I wasn't done. There were still businesses to build, lives to change, stories to write. But none of it would be about proving anything to them. It would be about building something that couldn't be taken away. My phone buzzed once more, an email notification. It was from Elliot. Subject: New Project Proposal, Carter Equity and Innovation Fund. I smiled. He'd done it. The idea we'd only hinted at, a venture fund dedicated to women-owned startups, was real, and my name was on it. I looked out at the city, at the lights flickering against the glass, and whispered to myself, maybe this is what peace feels like. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was chasing anything. I'd already caught it. The next morning, I woke before dawn, dressed, and stood on my balcony with a cup of coffee. The skyline stretched before me, familiar yet endlessly new. Somewhere miles away, my family would be waking too, facing their own reflections, their own reckonings. But I didn't think of them with bitterness anymore. Only clarity. They had built walls. I had learned how to build doors. And as the sun began to rise over the glass towers of the city I'd claimed for myself, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not triumph, not revenge. Freedom. Christmas looked different that year. No polished china, no grand table, no speeches about success or shame. Just me, a fire flickering quietly in my downtown apartment, and the soft hum of jazz drifting through the room. Outside, the snow fell steady, blanketing the city in silence. I used to hate this time of year, the way it reminded me of every door I wasn't welcome behind. But now that ache was gone. In its place was something gentler, like breathing clean air after years of smoke. For the first time, Christmas felt like mine. The doorbell rang just as I was pouring a second cup of coffee. I hesitated. Few people had my address. When I opened the door, I found Grace standing there, bundled in her long coat, cheeks pink from the cold. She held a small box wrapped in silver paper. "Merry Christmas," she said softly. I smiled, surprised, but not unwelcome. "You came." She nodded. I figured it was time to stop just texting. I stepped aside to let her in. She looked around, taking in the space, the minimalist decor, the quiet elegance that came not from wealth but peace. "It's beautiful," she said. "You always did have a good eye." We sat by the fire, the sound of snow against the window filling the pauses between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Grace exhaled, her shoulders relaxing. "Mom's been volunteering at the shelter every weekend. She says it helps her sleep. Dad's trying. He goes with her sometimes." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" She nodded. "He told me he saw you. At the bridge." "Yeah," I said quietly. "We talked." Grace hesitated. "He said you forgave him." I thought about that for a moment before answering. "Not exactly. I just stopped carrying the weight for him." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like forgiveness to me." Maybe it was. I motioned to the box she'd brought. "What's that?" She slid it across the table. "Open it." Inside was a photograph, old, worn, and faded at the corners. It showed the two of us as kids, sitting under the Christmas tree, both wearing matching pajamas. She couldn't have been more than 6. I was maybe 9. Behind us, Mom and Dad were laughing, captured in a rare moment of warmth. "I found it in one of Mom's old albums," Grace said. "Thought maybe you'd want to have it." I stared at the picture for a long time. For years I'd avoided remembering that version of us, before the distance, before the hierarchy, before love came with conditions. Now it didn't hurt anymore. It just was. "Thank you," I said quietly. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking. Really talking for the first time in years. She told me about her kids, her work, how she'd been afraid to reach out sooner because she thought I hated her. I told her I never did that, I just didn't know how to come back without losing myself again. At one point she asked, "Do you ever think about them, about us, the way things were?" I smiled sadly. Sometimes. But I think the version of us I miss never really existed. We just remember the good parts louder. Grace nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm glad you're happy, Julia." "I am," I said. And I meant it. When she left that evening, she hugged me tightly. Next year, she whispered Christmas at my place. No conditions. Just family. Maybe, I said. But this time, it wasn't a refusal, just a promise to choose carefully. After she left, I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker beneath the falling snow. My phone buzzed. A new email. Subject: Share Update Carter Equity Fund. It was from Elliot. I opened it and couldn't help but laugh softly. The first line read, "Congratulations, partner. The fund hit 200 milers today. You own 40% of the shares." For a moment, I just stared at the number, stunned. Not because of the money, but because of what it symbolized. Independence, legacy, power earned, not inherited. I poured a glass of wine and lifted it to the city beyond the glass. To every table I was told I couldn't sit at, I whispered. I built my own. The fire crackled softly behind me. Somewhere far away, my parents were probably sitting in a smaller, quieter home, learning how to talk without pride filling every pause. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As midnight approached, I stepped onto the balcony. Snowflakes caught in my hair, the city below glowing like a constellation of second chances. This wasn't revenge anymore. It wasn't even redemption. It was peace, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. I thought of my father's last words at the bridge. Power means nothing if it costs you your family. He was right. But I'd learned something he hadn't. Family isn't who sits beside you at dinner. It's who stands with you when you finally rise from the table. I turned my face toward the sky, letting the snow fall against my skin, and smiled. "Here's to the next chapter," I said softly. Then, as if the city itself was listening, my phone buzzed again, a flood of notifications from strangers who'd read my story, shared my post, and sent messages of support. The world had seen what I'd been through, and somehow it had turned my scars into a signal. So I wrote one final message back for everyone watching: don't wait for an invitation. Build your own table. And when you do, make room for someone else. I hit the post, then whispered to the city below, "This one's for me." The post went live, and within minutes it began to spread, likes, shares, comments, people tagging their own stories beneath mine. I set the phone down, smiling. The glass towers around me shimmered in the winter night, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt infinite. And somewhere in the distance, I swear I could hear the faint sound of a bell. The kind that rings when a story finally beautifully comes full circle.